next thing that came to my mind is, when is it time to rebrand? Because ideally it's day one, right? Ideally you start a company and you hire a great designer, a great branding agency, and they give you an awesome brand that can live for 10 years. But maybe that's not super realistic. You know, if you're cash flow and you're starting a business and it's just probably don't have that level of thought going into it, you probably do it yourself or hire somebody that you know that can do an affordable thing. So when is it time to do a rebrand?
Yeah, I think the first phrase that comes to my mind right away is like, done is better than perfect.
Sure.
Right. And just to your point, if you're a solopreneur, you're getting something launched off from nothing, you need to have something rather than stressing about having the perfect thing. And if you can think of great messaging and great other, some of those other really critical pieces, like your logo is a piece of that. So if you're missing one piece of the pie, you still have other pieces to play with, right? So
it's still a pretty good pie.
It's still a pretty good pie, right? You would still enjoy it. And so I think initially, to your point, off the bat would be best case scenario because you're launching with something right away. You see this a lot with Kickstart products where they're launching with a brand and the brand, it hasn't even come out yet, but they already have the branding established.
Yeah.
And that creates buy-in for people to invest into something, and then they launch the product. I think the second best time though, really is when it sounds too simple, but when you can afford it. It is better for you to put your money away, to save up and pay someone well than to try to get a $200 logo with no direction with it. There's times sure, yes, you can go to Fiverr and get a decent logo, right? For a fair price, but it's a once and done transaction. Yeah. So you don't want, you want to work with people that you're going to have access to. Yeah. And I think that's part of what I sell as a designer. I'm not just selling you the product, but I'm selling you access. If you come back to me and say, hey, this person's asking for a particular file, can you export that? Because I don't even know how to do that.
Sure.
I'm yeah, it's going to be in your inbox in 10 minutes. It's done. That's not something I'm charging you for, right? And I think that's really important. So saving up and valuing it enough to save for it. Yeah. And when you get to a point having the discipline to say, yes, we're going to invest in branding is really big.
I think a good exercise for a lot of businesses to go through if they're in that kind of spot where they're am I losing out because of my logo, because of my branding? Is that actually something that's hurting me on the competitive marketplace? I think a great thing to do would be just to take your 5 to 10 biggest competitors, people who are competing for, local sponsorships or competing for, you're seeing their companies over and over again on jobs that you're bidding. Or what I would suggest is actually taking those logos and putting them all on one Word document or whatever you're comfortable doing. And just asking some people forget everything
Yeah, what jumps out to you?
What are the companies you want to hire on here?
Right.
I think that's a great exercise to go through.
It's like a blind taste test.
Yeah. And there's a couple different scenarios that I see with companies when they come and say, hey, we're looking to rebrand. What do you think? There's some people just have a bad logo. It was probably bad day one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It probably was, they went in their Word. Some you can tell for sure what they did is they went into a word processor, picked a font, typed in their company name and, found the one they liked the best and they rolled with it. Right. Then there's another scenario where you have a logo that at one point was probably really good and really competitive, but it's been 10 years, it's been 15 years, and it just looks 10 or 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And those are signs that other people pick up on as well.
Yeah.
If you're looking through for a plumber or for an electrician or for a dentist and you see a logo that's clearly outdated, you just pause for a second and go I wonder if their service is also outdated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two things come to my mind. The first thing you said was very simple logos. I go to a word processor and I type something in, and we call that right now we're living in an era of blands. We're actually leaving that era from a design perspective. When I say era, But if you walk through Target, you'll see all these like toothpaste companies and all these like shape razors, and they're very simple, right? It's literally like Futura tracked out, spaced, like each letter is spaced out really nicely, and that's their logo. It'll be like Smile, and that's the name of the toothpaste brand.
Right.
Which is different from you going into your word processor, because the designer still thoughtfully approached that very simple font.
Yeah.
So it's done with intention. But I will say they're adding a lot of other things to that brand outside of the logo, which is just like, right? So they're making sure that they have pops of color and all these different like fonts and photography. All of their photos are really loud and stuff. So the logo doesn't have to captivate you because other things are captivating you within the brand, right? They have phenomenal photos of a dad over the sink with his son, and they're brushing their teeth, and they have suds all over their mouth, and they're smiling, and that's what's captivating you. It's not the little font on the bottom that says smile,
Right.
which is different from how you're presenting yourself as
Right.
as maybe a local service provider. I'll let you go ahead and share a thought.
The thing I was thinking of as you're saying that is like my instinct when it comes to a logo is like, I want some sort of visual representation in there of what you do. So if you're a toothpaste, I want a tooth or something, some sort, or maybe like something that looks shiny, like something that is clearly saying this is going to clean your mouth, this is going to make your breath better, whatever that is, in a visual form factor. But if you do have a bland, then you have to represent that on the packaging in some other way.
Yeah.
I think so. Maybe it's like a mint leaf somewhere on there, or like, different things that aren't part of the logo. You have to do that other ways. And so you can get away with that bland, if you will, when you are thinking on all levels. But a lot of times what happens with like a service company is maybe they are thinking on the level of like, I want this to be simple. I don't want it to be, too confusing or too, like, I'm not a designer, so let me just, pick a font. The problem with that often becomes they never do anything else to support it.
Yep. And that's the biggest thing, is that I think you could effectively, like if you're just starting something today, I think you could go into Microsoft Word and literally type out something and make yourself a quote unquote logo. But it needs to be supported by other things. If you're not doing that, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice. And that's the difference between what we would see, what we would call a bland from like Target versus like your version of just typing something out. They're different. Yeah. What was it? Remind me of the second point that you had made. So you said the first one was just like a word processor, and then the second thing.
Well, it's just at one point this logo was probably pretty good. Like think about it in terms of like, remember like icons on the original iPhone? Like they're like 3-dimensional, and they look like little bubbles that you could touch. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then over time, the iPhone or an Android did the same thing, where like everything was very flat. And it was the opposite of that. It was almost like they were drawn on paper and your screen was just a flat piece of paper. Yeah. And now it's somewhere in between. It's kind of going like a little bit backwards.
Yeah. More bold, pops of color. Like, not to go down this rabbit trail too much, but the last iOS that Johnny Ive designed was, I forget which iPhone it was. It might have been the 6.
And Johnny Ive's like the legendary Apple designer.
Yeah, it was the one where you swipe down and everything was almost like glass. Yeah. It was like, you know what I'm talking about? Exactly. And like the circles and stuff. That was the last one that he designed. And that one was when it was like all flat. Yeah. Like, what I mean? Every icon was just 2-dimensional. It was disappeared. And now to your point, it's going back to like some hybrid of the two, which I like. Yeah. But what I wanted to say about your second point about you might have a logo and it's 5 to 10 years old and it's starting to feel outdated. I think you're spot on. People feel that, whether they ever say it or not. There's a subconscious like feeling of this company feels outdated.
There's a little bit of security there. And I think that's the argument a lot of these business owners would make is like, well, this has been around a long time. People understand that. And maybe even if they don't know our company name from being in the community, they're new to the area. Yeah. They still see this kind of like retro something in that. But I think they're confusing themselves because you can rebrand and still capture the essence of what that is, to the point where probably for your less visually attentive customers, they won't even notice rebrand really.
And we'll look at, hopefully we have some time. I want to look at a specific site where they do a lot of old companies and they rebrand them. It's Jones, Knowles, and Richie, JKR. Sure. We can look at them. They do massive corporate brands, which that's not who we're speaking to, but it's a good example of how do you take something that is existing and established and just redesign it in a way that's very recognizable. What I wanted to say, though, in regards to your second point was there's two approaches, two things that came to my mind as you said that. The first is the Subway model. Subway Foods or whatever, they rebrand every 5 years, corporate. And it's up to obviously the franchise owners to keep revising the store. But when they rebrand, they essentially just, it's the same logo, but they're just revising it in a way that's, it's obviously recognizable, but it's refreshed. So I wouldn't even say rebrand. It's more of like a refresh every 5 years.
They think fresh every 5 years.
They think fresh every 5 years.
Gotcha.
They practice what they preach, okay? They really do. That's great. I love that you said that. The second thing that came to my mind, though, is like timelessness. And I am a sucker for like old designers who just believed in like Massimo Vignelli and some other old designers that I love, like the founding fathers of design kind of, or modern design, I should say. They believed in timelessness, that, you know, your logo really shouldn't need to be changed all the time. And it's not that I think your logo can change and should change if it needs to, but it's worth considering timelessness in what you are doing, because timelessness in design fights the temptation to follow trend. So there are times where it's appropriate for your brand to be a trendy brand. And then there's other times where you might be a more stoic and timeless brand that when you do refresh, you're not going to do something completely new. It's really just going to be a tweak to what you're doing. Tighten things up a bit, maybe brighten the color, like little things. Yeah. Very subtle though. And yeah, that's huge. And those are two kind of models where it's like, hey, we know we're going to rebrand every 5 to 10 years. That's just what we do. We give it a fresh look. Or you kind of approach it like, hey, let's create something that's really simple, that's going to work in 10 and 20 years.
If you enjoyed this BrandNerd podcast clip, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. In the meantime, here are additional videos you might find illuminating.